This video is sponsored by Only Crits. Chromatic dragons in D&D don't make sense. At least that's how I've always felt. I love dragons, and I love dragons in D&D. I love the terror your players feel the moment they find out they're facing probably the most famous monster in human history, and the feeling of triumph when they actually get to slay a dragon. And I love all the different types of dragons with all their different types of breath. They give the GM a whole lot of flexibility to use dragons in different environments. They present different types of damage so the players aren't guaranteed to be able to resist the breath from every dragon they face. And for new players who aren't familiar with the tropes of D&D yet, facing the different flavors of Chromatic Dragon can be a really fantastic surprise. However, according to the lore, dragons of each different color have the same personality type. Red dragons are tyrants, black dragons are more pragmatic, white dragons are more savage, green dragons are more deceptive, and blue dragons are territorial. And why? It doesn't really make any sense that all creatures of a certain specific monster type all have the same personality. But it could make sense. We can make it make sense. And thankfully, I've got a great excuse to talk about dragons right now, because fellow Dungeon Tubers Ginny D and Pointy Hat have launched Monster Week, an annual event where a bunch of YouTubers all make videos about the same type of monster. And this year, it's Dragon Week. And so for my Dragon Week video, I want to talk about why chromatic dragons don't make any sense, and how we can come up with an explanation that helps to justify it. Side note, I know I'm behind on my Critical Role Demystified videos. I was really hoping to put some out earlier this month so that I could cover the Thordak fight for Dragon Week, but obviously the month kind of got away from me, as you can tell. Though the nice benefit is that once I do reach the big climactic finale of the Dragon storyline, I'll be able to reference all these Dragon Week videos from all these other creators to help offer some insights into how to improve our dragon combats using Critical Role as an example. That wasn't on purpose, but it's going to work out nicely. But also, seriously, don't worry, those videos are coming very, very soon, I promise. I promise. But for today, let's just talk about some dragons. Now, to be clear, I don't mind the fact that all chromatic dragons are evil and all metallic dragons are good. This isn't like orcs or drow where the pushback is meant to address potentially problematic language or anything like that. Dragons aren't human, they're not even vaguely humanoid. I'm cool with the idea that chromatic dragons see themselves as above humans. They see us as basically insects, and so they're willing to do evil things to us because they regard us without even a shred of pity. If anything, I have more of an issue with metallic dragons, but that's just because I think they're kind of boring. And I'll probably talk about them whenever I make my video about high-level NPC allies, since that's usually the role metallic dragons play in just about any given adventure. So, no, the issue isn't that all chromatic dragons are evil by default. And I don't even mind the fact that dragons of certain colors share personalities. This can actually give a game master a good excuse to introduce different types of dragons with different personalities without even having to do a whole lot of extra work. In fact, in the Vox Machina campaign, Matt Mercer modeled most members of the Chroma Conclave after the chromatic dragon personalities from the 2014 Monster Manual. Thordak the Red Dragon is a tyrant, ruling over all the others. Vorgal the White Dragon is the most feral, a primal hunter who loves taking down huge beasts. Umbrasyl the Black Dragon makes an alliance with a vicious Goliath herd, and that may have been Matt's way of representing the Black Dragon's sadistic nature. And most notably, the 2014 Monster Manual describes the Green Dragon as the most cunning and treacherous dragon, using misdirection and trickery to get the upper hand, and that their interests are often less about territory than it is about gaining power and wealth with as little effort as possible. And so, of course, Raishan the Green Dragon is a powerful spellcaster who uses illusions and lives among humans as a spy rather than ruling over a city and collecting tithes. And she also came up with the plot to free Thordak, and she betrays him and goes to the heroes to recruit them to help slay Thordak. No spoilers beyond that point, because we haven't gotten that far, but even just from what we've seen so far, it does seem like he's referencing the 2014 Monster Manual. So I don't have any issue with the idea that all these dragons are evil. And from the perspective of a game master, I don't really mind that dragons all share specific types of personalities based on their scale color. The question we're asking today is just, why? From a world-building perspective, why does the color of your scales determine your personality? Why does the book tell us that the red dragons are the most tyrannical, and the white dragons are the most feral, and the black dragons are the most sadistic, and the green dragons are the sneaky tempters, and the blue dragons are the lurkers? Now, you might not need an explanation, and that's fine. Continue to enjoy running your games exactly the way you want. That's totally cool. But what if we want to dissect these creatures a bit more and come up with a satisfying explanation for why dragons of similar scale shades share so much in common? Well, the first possible explanation might come from their elements, and specifically, their environments. Blue dragons are described in the 2014 Monster Manual as being territorial and methodical, and both of these can be explained by the fact that they live in the desert. But why live in the desert? Aside from the idea of desert storms, why do the dragons that breathe lightning live in the desert? They could just as easily live on mountain peaks or near the sea. But the book explains that blue dragons bury themselves under the desert, so only the horn on their nose emerges from the sand and appears like just another rock sticking up from the dunes. It's natural camouflage. This is also why they're described as natural burrowers. They've evolved in such a way that they can live in deserts, and they're methodical because they're essentially ambush predators. They live in an area that is resource poor, so they have to be patient with every potential meal that comes their way. This could also explain why they're described as being specifically territorial, because living in the desert, they'll probably so seldom encounter food or resources that they have to protect every scrap of territory and power they've collected. This also helps explain the new spin on blue dragons in the 2025 Monster Manual, which puts a greater focus on blue dragons working with other creatures. Blue dragon wormlings serve other powerful beings, so they can learn how to control their own subjects, and eventually they surpass their masters in power and make them bend the knee. But of course, a desert dragon would want to curry favor with a stronger creature. That's how they survive in such a hostile location, by making allies as soon as possible. Young blue dragons, quote, might temporarily cooperate with other dragons or powerful villains to gain followers and influence. And adult blue dragons, who have cultivated armies of followers and networks of spies, will apparently, quote, enact elaborate schemes to ruin their foes, and more relevantly, test the loyalty of their subjects. Blue dragons have to play nice with others a bit more often because they're in an environment where the strongest survive. It's like Dune. You can either fight everyone you encounter and hope that they're not a gifted fighter too, but if they're living in such a hostile landscape, they probably are gifted warriors, so you might be better served by playing some politics. But if that's the case for blue dragons, then why are white dragons so different? White dragons breathe ice breath and they live in Arctic landscapes, glaciers, and frozen seas. These are also extremely resource-poor regions. So why aren't they politically savvy like the blue dragons? Instead, they're more feral and savage than the other dragons. The only thing they have in common is that they're both burrowers. Otherwise, they're wildly different. Well, as the 2025 Monster Manual points out, it's not just that food is scarce in a white dragon's territory, but predators are merciless. In the desert, the most deadly common enemy is the desert itself. In the frozen tundra, it's specifically the cold. But humans don't tend to travel through the frozen wilderness if they can avoid it. You can shelter yourself from the heat in order to trade with other desert cities, and so blue dragons are more likely to encounter merchant caravans and nomadic tribes. You don't go out into the desert to farm or fish or catch food, you really just go to travel. In the cold, the settlements are likely to be so remote that you have to leave your settlement to find food, to fish, and to hunt. And the natural predators in the tundra are things like the woolly mammoth or the remoras. These are beasts that will fuck you up if you fight them. So white dragons have to be more savage just to fight off the other beasts of the tundra. And there's also not a lot of empires to conquer in the frozen wasteland. There's not a lot of allies to find. So white dragons don't have as much interest in building empires or gathering followers. Instead, they take pride in being the best hunters because they have little else. They have to be great hunters to survive, so that's what they hang their identity on. They're the smallest and weakest types of chromatic dragons, but they also tend to be the most powerful predators in their Arctic landscapes. In the 2025 Monster Manual, white dragons are the only dragons that are not presented as spellcasters once they reach adulthood, because you have to imagine that they wouldn't be exposed to a lot of spellcasters, and they just don't care about magic as much. Additionally, because white dragons encounter very few mortals, there's really no need for them to learn how to manipulate people. So of course they just seem more feral. It's true. According to the book, they're also just not as smart. The stat blocks provided in the 2025 Monster Manual start with an intelligence of 5 for a white dragon wormling and only go up to 10 for an ancient white dragon. But that's also the average human intelligence at that point, so they're not cavemen. But maybe the reason they seem especially feral is that they just wouldn't care. Like the Beast in Beauty and the Beast having no idea how to use a spoon. He's obviously not stupid. He just never has guests, so why would he bother with spoons? White dragons are the same as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, that's what I'm saying. Okay. In that one specific way, they're the same. Green dragons are basically the opposite. They live in forests where they're the most likely of all dragons to encounter mortals. And forests don't really have anything to do with poison breath, but they have green scales, so the forest provides the perfect environment for them to hide among the trees. And that's how the 2014 Monster Manual tells us that they hunt. They stalk their prey through the trees because the environment lends itself well to that style of hunting. However, the forest is also where a lot of D&D adventures take place. So there are a lot of other monsters in the forests. There's owlbears and bugbears and chimeras and manticores and so much more. So it's hard to be the dominant predator in an environment where so many other creatures are likely to live. It's also hard to be the apex predator with a lair when at any moment some mortals can come blundering into the forest and start clearing the trees because they need the resources or they want to build a road. None of the other dragons in any other environment really have to contend with the same level of human encroachment, which might be why the 2014 Monster Manual says green dragons don't hoard wealth the same way so many other dragons do. They still do it, and more on that shortly, but it's just not wise for them to collect a whole bunch of stuff they can't pick up and move if they have to relocate their lair without much notice.
Don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner.
So instead they focus on obtaining power and control, rather than controlling a fixed territory. The 2014 Monster Manual tells us that their preferred form of loot is all the creatures they control. The 2025 book expands on this by telling us that the most prized possessions of a green dragon are compromising documents, family heirlooms, and sentimental treasures, because these are items that mean a lot to mortals. So these objects give a green dragon more control over you. It doesn't benefit the green dragon to slay every creature that crosses their path, because too many dead humans in the forest will just prompt more humans to come looking for what happened. That's honestly how a lot of D&D adventures start, actually. Someone never came back from the forest. That's weird. Go find their bodies and slay the monster that's probably responsible for it. So in order to keep themselves hidden, green dragons would have to make deals with any creature that could be useful to them. Even if all they're doing is playing everyone against each other, that still keeps the dragon safe. This could also help explain why they frequently have goblin or yuan-ti or ettercap servants, as well as why they delight in corrupting elves, because these are the creatures they might encounter in the forests, and might want to bend to their will. Black dragons live in swamps, but I don't think that offers a clue into why they're so sadistic. It's just a good place for them to hide because the 2014 Monster Manual says black dragons smell like rotten vegetation, and so a swamp environment would help mask that smell. However, the Black Dragon art and flavor text from the 2025 Monster Manual offers a fantastic potential explanation for their perverse personalities. Their faces look like skulls. It almost seems like the acid has burned away most of their flesh on their faces. Now, we assume dragons are completely immune to their element, and indeed, black dragons are immune to acid damage. But clearly something's going on with their faces. And even if they don't literally have exposed bone on their skulls, the idea that their faces look like skulls can actually just explain a lot of the way they behave. They hide in the ruins of ancient empires because they feel more kinship with the dead than the living. The 2014 Monster Manual says they hoard the relics of fallen kingdoms to remind themselves of their greatness. The more civilizations a dragon outlasts, the more entitled it feels to claim the wealth of current civilizations for itself. I think a black dragon's personality could be explained by the fact that they're more conscious of their own mortality than other dragons are, because they literally look like skulls. They're more cautious than other dragons because they know they might die. They're more likely to abandon their territory when another dragon comes a-calling because they have no delusions that they could live forever. The 2025 Monster Manual doubled down on this idea of associating the black dragons with death by giving them a very strong connection to undead, describing how black dragons might be aligned with cultists who summon undead, giving them spells to animate the dead themselves, and painting their ultimate goals as surrounding themselves with empires of death. They basically want to outlive everything else around them. In fact, maybe the black dragon's face really is exposed bone. Maybe we could even say that the black dragon is actually in constant agony due to their flesh being burned off their face by their own acidic nature. And so, of course they're sadistic, they're in constant pain, so they're putting it on other people. And so of course they take pride in outlasting other conquered civilizations, the same way a patient with a terminal diagnosis might rejoice outlasting certain milestones. But in the more megalomaniacal sense of, I lived longer than an entire nation, therefore I am the best. And speaking of megalomaniacal tendencies and burning sensations, let's talk about the red dragon. Red dragons are literally the strongest of all dragons. Whether they're a wormling, young, adult, or ancient, the red dragon stat block is always of a higher CR than other dragons of the same age. And we could actually explain this with their environments. Red dragons make their lairs in volcanoes, and so we could imagine they might either draw power from the volcanic terrain, or they just became the strongest because they can resist such a severe environment. Because I don't think any other dragon makes its lair in its own element that is dangerous in the same way. Humans can live in the snow and deserts and forests and swamps. And while white dragons do live in frozen landscapes, they can only endure to their elemental powers. It's not like no other creature can live in the snow, just for a shorter amount of time than a white dragon. And black and green dragons might have lairs full of acid pools or poison fog, but those aren't naturally occurring. They're generated by the dragon's presence. But red dragons live in natural environments that most other creatures, especially humans and humanoids, literally cannot withstand. So they are verifiably the strongest dragons. So of course they consider themselves superior to all other dragons. They know they're literally the best. And this explains their tyrannical nature. They know they're the strongest, so they take pride in dominating other creatures. This also explains why they covet treasure. It's something they can collect because they're awesome and powerful. Although, this is the next weird thing about dragons. They all hoard wealth. It's basically a compulsion for all dragons. Even the ones that have caveats for their wealth, like how white dragons take pride in dominating other monsters and green dragons value political capital, even those dragons still have hoards of some sort. And that's not really something that can be explained by their environment. So clearly there's some other explanation out there to help explain why chromatic dragons share personality traits. And one possible answer occurred to me as I was rewatching the first season of Stargate SG-1. In the first episode after the pilot, we learned more about the body-snatching aliens who'll be the enemies throughout most of the series. And specifically, we learn why so many of them are narcissistic tyrants the moment they're born. because they aren't born as blank slates.
A gold is born with the knowledge of all ghouls that came before it.
Genetic memory.
Maybe the reason so many chromatic dragons share the same personality traits is because they have these connections to previous dragons. These green dragons have all inherited memories and personalities and compulsions from the green dragons that came before. This doesn't just plug up a plot hole about how all these dragons have shared personality traits, it also opens up a lot of potential storylines for your game, because this kind of reframes each color of dragon as essentially one large family. And that's when something else clicked for me. When we're dealing with one big family with a bunch of members who all do a bunch of evil stuff, what does that remind you of? Because to me, that sounds like the Mafia. Now, truth be told, I know very little about the actual real-world Mafia, so it's more accurate to say that it reminds me of Mafia movies. And so once again, let's look at those connections. We've got a large family where the members might not all get along with each other, but they do all look out for each other. That lines up with how I've always imagined villains would behave anyway. Creatures that have made any sort of alliance can snipe at each other, they can compete for resources, try to undercut each other, even battle for territory. But if anybody from outside the group comes after one of them, they have to retaliate with everything they've got, because it has nothing to do with whether or not they like each other. They just can't afford to look weak. And the same goes for the characters in a Mafia movie.
Never tell anybody outside the family what you're thinking again.
But also, this idea of borrowing Mafia ideas for our dragons just does keep getting better the deeper we dig into it. In New York, in the real world, there were the 5 families. 5 families that divided up the city, but sometimes still came into conflict. Just the same way the 5 different types of chromatic dragons might typically keep to themselves, but can sometimes still fight if they cross into each other's territory or into each other's business. And in fact, originally, one gangster, Salvatore Maranzano, set up the arrangement, and all the other families reported to him. But then he was assassinated, because of course he was, and so the family set up the commission, where the heads of the 5 families would rule over all the Mafia activity in the entire country, and would mediate conflicts between them. 5 heads, you say, each linked to a different family, ruling over all the families at once. That kind of sounds like a certain 5-headed dragon with a head that matches each type of chromatic dragon, doesn't it? Tiamat is essentially the Mafia elders, only intervening when a conflict between dragons gets too nasty. Otherwise, she just lets the various families battle for power and doesn't interfere. Now, this isn't necessarily a perfect match. First of all, the power dynamics in a Mafia story are a bit different from dragons. The Don of a Mafia family doesn't have to get his hands dirty. He can just tell one of his enforcers to do something and they'll do it. That doesn't mean that a high-ranking gangster can never be the one to pull the trigger, but their power comes from the fact that they don't have to. They have so much influence, someone else will do it for them. Dragons aren't quite the same. They can absolutely go take care of business themselves rather than relying on enforcers, although that obviously doesn't mean that they won't still use enforcers and henchmen, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Another major difference is the fact that, very famously, gangsters are able to carve out territory by, apparently, helping out the residents. I'm not going to play the whole scene for copyright reasons, but Oswald Cobb's first big speech in episode 1 of The Penguin is all about this. It's about a gangster in Oswald's neighborhood when he was a kid who was beloved for the things he did to help out the common people. Dragons typically don't make those same attempts at seeming magnanimous. Dragons are fundamentally selfish creatures who don't have any delusions about the fact that they are just out for themselves. Now, sure, sometimes the characters in a Mafia film are a little bit less focused on seeming like they're good for the community, but they still have to make certain choices for the good of their own family. And Mafia stories often put a lot of focus on family traditions and on big events, like weddings and birthdays. Now, your dragons don't have to like each other. They don't have to be carrying out a tradition of a big wedding where everyone gets along. But we can still borrow the more cutthroat aspects of the Mafia characters, where they're each out for themselves, but they also can't let the family look weak. And not only will their shared lineage help explain their common personality traits, but it also creates some interesting dynamics and goals for the dragons. They might not all like each other, but they might still depend on each other. And they definitely can't allow any threat to their fellow dragons to remain unchallenged. And there's another benefit to looking at gangster movies for inspiration for our dragons. We have a wide range of characters we can raid for dragon personalities. Just as an example, in The Godfather, Vito Corleone has 3 sons: Sonny, Michael, and Fredo. And if you had 3 dragons in your campaign modeled after these 3 characters, those dragons would be very different from each other. And so your players aren't likely to feel bored when they face these 3 green dragons throughout the campaign, because these dragons would approach the party with wildly different tactics based on who they are. A dragon modeled after Sonny would be a lot more headstrong and more reckless. He probably wouldn't have a whole lot of long-term plans. He would just be focused on revenge for something else the players had done.
This is business, not personal.
They shot my father.
Even the shooting of your father was business, not personal, Sonny.
Well, then business will have to suffer, all right?
A dragon based on Fredo would be more of a screw-up, and at the risk of spoiling anything that happens in a few very good movies you should definitely watch, it seems like a dragon based on Fredo could be belittled by all the other dragons higher in the food chain. And even the minions of the dragons could still feel like they're babysitting the screw-up.
He was banging cocktail waitresses 2 at a time. Players couldn't get a drink at the table.
And then a dragon based on Michael would be a lot more cautious and calculating, closer to what we're used to expecting from a big bad evil guy. But he wouldn't be shouting and raving about how they're going to kill the heroes. They wouldn't be openly megalomaniacal. They'd be much more reserved.
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
That's what's fun about a writing prompt, is it can give you new ideas for how to characterize your villains in the campaign. And in fact, I think I'm going to fold the trio of dragons into my campaign and start teasing their master plots, and maybe, eventually, the friction between them. Because that's the fun thing about multiple villains, is that they can clash against each other in interesting ways, even when they're trying to present a unified front to their enemies.
You're my older brother, and I love you. But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again. Ever.
Of course, that brings us to the next problem. How do you start introducing the storyline early in your campaign? My players are only level 3, it's way too early for a dragon. So how can you make the villains present in the story before they actually take the stage? Well, this is where we can borrow another very valuable tool from mafia movies: the Henchmen. Now, like I said earlier, regardless of how likely a crime boss is to get his own hands dirty in a mob movie, they're still just mortal men. They can't be everywhere at once, and they can be killed. Dragons are, living fighter jets raining hellfire down upon medieval peasants and gentry alike. They are not as frail as your average made man. But also, dragons can't be everywhere all at once. It benefits them to have a network acting on their behalf, representing their interests across the land. Dragons also don't need to be the one pulling the metaphorical trigger every time. Not because they're too important to get their hands dirty, but just because they're too important to even begin to waste their time on whatever piddling, miserable, pissant mortal might be causing problems for the lowest level of their operation. Even in the Dragonlance books, some of the first bad guys our heroes encounter are the Draconians, these human-dragon hybrids who march around in armies, acting on the commands of dragons and their dragon riders. Side note, my friend William SRD is currently doing a Dragonlance reread with Auntie Haunty and another friend of theirs who has never read the books. You can check out their podcast, it's called The Lance, and it's been fun for me to get back into that series, which I only read a little bit of, by reading it along with the podcast, so you should give it a listen, it's really good. Now, there are hundreds of henchmen in Mafia movies you could rip off for your dragon's minions, but today I want to show you how it's done by focusing on 2 of the best.
I have a special practice. I handle 1 client. Now, you have my number. I'll wait for your call.
The first is Tom Hagen, again from The Godfather. He's a lawyer who only works for the Corleone family and was basically raised by them. He's not Sicilian, so he'll never be in charge or anything. He'll always be the Consigliere, an advisor to the family. That's the highest he can get. But also, he goes on a solo mission early in the film to express Don Corleone's desire for a family friend to get a job in a movie, and when the meeting goes poorly, Tom has the unsightly job of escalating the situation and making it clear that they don't take no for an answer. Now, you could have this play out exactly the same way in your own game. Someone like Tom Hagen can show up as the villain of an entire adventure, or just a seemingly friendly face, here to make a deal with the players. And if the negotiation goes bad, maybe Tom has some tricks up his sleeve. It turns out he's a powerful warrior, or a spellcaster or something. This could be a fun way to essentially represent your dragons in the game, without actually having them fight the players when they're too low level to survive the fight. On the other hand, maybe your Tom equivalent is just playing good cop, and when he fails to make a deal, he just excuses himself and returns to the dragon, and now the players will have to deal with the next henchman the dragon will send their way, the ones who don't make deals, and who don't take no for an answer. And speaking of less reasonable henchmen we can model after characters from mafia movies...
What do you mean funny? Funny how? How am I funny?
Tommy from Goodfellas is a loose cannon who hates being insulted. He's a spiteful little gargoyle with a short fuse and an itchy trigger finger. And man, oh man, he would make such a fun bad guy to put into your D&D game. In my mind, he's a kobold, but you could do something else with him, and that would be equally valid. Is he an imp? A slod? A nothic? Or a gargoyle, like I said earlier? Is your Tom Hagen equivalent a human spellcaster, or a mysterious Aladdin, or maybe a vampire lord? That's the fun thing about dragons. They attract power to them. And so you should feel completely free to throw whatever monsters you want into your adventure. As long as they make it clear that they're not here acting on their own behalf, they're here representing Vitralazax, the Screaming Terror. Because that is the biggest gift a Mafia story gives us that we can incorporate into our own adventures. When the bad guys in a mob movie do something, they want everybody to know it was them. They exert pressure on other factions by openly saying, yeah, that was us. What the fuck are you gonna do about it? And honestly, when we're running our games, I think sometimes we get so seduced by the idea of complex conspiracies and secret factions. But it can be nice to have some bad guys that are just really obvious about how evil they are, and how nobody can do anything about them, because these low-level ruffians are backed up by some mid-level threat who in turn answers to one of the higher-level enforcers who directly reports to the dragon. The hierarchy we get in something like the Mafia can also lend itself really well to a long-running campaign, as the players encounter the different elements of a criminal conspiracy that really isn't trying that hard to stay hidden. The truth is, I really like chromatic dragons. I just want to find a way to help justify the things I already love about them by making them make a little bit more sense in our games, and I think that's what we've done here today. And if you want to bring a little bit of what makes dragons cool to your own tables, you can check out today's sponsor, Only Crits. Only Crits has some really cool dice, and some of my favorites are the ones that look like dragon scales. They've got this beautiful emerald scale set for your green dragon needs. They've got a gorgeous orange and blue set. They've got the royal blue, which is a cool Spider-Man color scheme going on. They've got turquoise, which is such a beautiful set. They've got a cool blue-purple amethyst set. And one of my favorites, they've got red-green, which could work for a green or red dragon, or for some lizard folk or yuan ti that might wear war paint, or for some sort of dragon-themed Christmas adventure. And if you visit onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you'll be able to save 12% off your order. Once again, that's onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thanks so much to Only Crits for sponsoring this video. Thanks so much for watching. Like I said, more videos coming very soon. Just keep your eyes out for them. If you like what I've got going on, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, check out my Patreon, and sign up for my newsletter. And all those links are in the doobly-doo below. Click here to check out another video where I take a deep dive into some other villains from media. In this case, it was the Daleks from Doctor Who, and I use them as an example for how to introduce classic villains and monsters into your campaign. That could be a very useful companion to this video. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.